Hi, I'm Coach Luca and this is the Reflective Coach podcast. Within this episode, I'm going to be talking about understanding yourself as a coach and how you can instill your own coaching philosophy, your values, and what you expect within training and when working with players in your training sessions, as well as being able to manage them. First and foremost, what do I mean about talking about ourselves and trying to understand ourselves? Well, we must understand what kind of coach we want to be, what kind of expectations we have for ourselves as coaches, and how can we have these expectations within our own training sessions and for our own players. We must also understand our personality, our traits, and understand when and where we must improve to continuously impact and work close with all of our players. Understanding ourselves will allow us to connect with the players that we have, as well as looking at the skill sets of the other available coaches we have around us, to try and connect with the entire group and holistically working in cohesion with the group that you have and the coaches that are available around you. So when I talk about understanding yourself, I look at myself as a coach. What do I expect from my players? What do I expect from myself? If I can't have high expectations for myself, then how can I expect to have them for my players? So in terms of this, what I talk about in terms of expectations and values and principles, one of my key values and principles and expectations is players turn up early. So I must turn up early to set that benchmark, to set the foundation, to show that I will be there early, and if I can be there early, so can the players. And that's always my argument back to them. If a player says, I can't be on time because of so-and-so, or I can't make it, especially as they get older, my argument is, well, if I can be there early, then so can you. Of course, there's different circumstances surrounding each player and as to why they can't make a session on time or why they may have been late. However, consistently, this becomes an issue, and we want to instill good standards in all of our players. And for me, this non-negotiable of turning up early is absolutely essential in every player regardless. If a player has a tough background in home life and they're travelling on their own, and of course there's these ethical issues for us to consider as coaches, much further than what happens on the pitch as we continue to look at how we impact all of our players, we can still have the expectation and support a player to turn up early. Of course, over time, as they want to expand their own expectations as a person as well as a player, we can look to support them on and off the pitch and support them within their home life, no matter what their problems may be, and look to try and change that dynamic for them. This is another conversation for another time, and I'm thinking from a youth perspective in terms of youth worker, in terms of counsellor, in terms of mentor, in terms of coach, teacher, and so on. And we capture all of this as a coach, and we do this in a voluntary capacity most of the time, especially as we work with our players. A lot of coaches think it's just a case of getting a ball on a pitch and some cones. That can be a great case if you're just there to help support sessions, or that you're there just to set up a team when you want them running. A lot of coaches won't consider the learning aspects for players. Of course, they'll understand that players are there to learn and want to learn, but they won't push on the learning, and over time, learning will only become natural to the players in what they can take away from the coaching context and the coaching environment. The coach will obviously have to learn over time by attending national governing body qualifications, training, whether there's any in-house mentoring, and will learn from their own coaching practice as well as how they prepare and as well as their own personal reflections. However, many coaches won't consider the fact that learning can take place on and off the pitch, and there's so much more to be learned for players and individuals that expands from just ball work. There's mentality in terms of psychology and how we work players, what strategies we can instill, how we can overcome fears, what are our coping strategies and mechanisms, how the players approach game, how's their match day management gone. So these are all examples of how we can support players in terms of their mindset and look at what expectations we have as coaches in terms of learning. Now, there's a lot of learning which needs to take place within the game of football, and I don't think there's enough learning offered to coaches or enough learning instilled within coaching sessions. So for me, I try to instill a learning outcome for every coaching session whilst trying to meet my objective. So there can be coaching principles where there's objectives in terms of technical work to be achieved by players, but then it can also be a learning outcome in terms of what have they learned, how, why, where, when, and what questions can be asked. And I try to link this onto each week. How can this be applied to a game situation? How can they pick up on it next week? How can they continue to take away some reading or to go and have some homework or downtime or reflection? Or how can they come back with questions next week? And for me, I want my players always to be learning. That way they're eager, that way they're asking key questions, that way they're able to continue to maximise on the way they're thinking about their approach, how they can look at role models within the game, how they can continue to improve. So I want my players to be learning as much as I'm learning. I want them to come into sessions and ask me questions. I want them to have learning outcomes and goals. I want them to learn as much as possible, which gives them as many possibilities in life, both as a player and as an individual. We lose so much talent within the grassroots game because players aren't learning and they're not challenged enough. Just training once a week and then having a game isn't enough. In some cases, this can only be offered by coaches and the supporting mechanism that is available. Coaches have a busy life, being married, having their own family, having their own job, and taking up the role of a volunteer coach and coaching a team and taking on all these personalities and all the responsibilities that come with managing a team. Then, of course, if you can only offer one session a week, then you're doing your bit for football and you're offering more than someone else could at that moment in time. So there is no criticism on that, but there is just an evaluation and a reflection point there that once a week isn't enough. Now, what I've looked to instill from the back end of COVID is the fact that there's online learning that continues to take place for all my players. So we constantly have Zoom calls and calls through Teams with questions and answers, reflection models. We look through PowerPoints, we look at studies, we look at videos for reflections and analytics in terms of developing the boys' analysis skills and their awareness. And if all that can take place off the pitch just from a 1 hour call and we continue to maximise these calls, then on the pitch they're going to have so much learning and they're going to be motivated to continue learning within their own time. So even if you only have the time to put on an hour on the grass a week, then have that extra hour here and there to just have a catch-up call and talk to your team. For me, this can do great wonders for your team and really can allow you to have more time to connect with them and have that relationship. You can also get them to understand and go off and do independent tasks which support their learning. This is a big key consideration for me, and this is something that I like to do with all my players. And I want them to continuously learn, and I want to continue to develop the digital methods at my football club. So we look at our digital enterprise, our digital management, our digital media, and we look at how we can maximise this with all our players. I look to try and create PowerPoints and give insights, as well as creating more learning resources and tools that are readily available for all coaches, players, and all of our stakeholders throughout the club. It also creates a bank of resources which is immediately available. Now, this is what kind of coach I want to be. I want to instill learning. I want to be motivated. I want to be committed. I want to turn up early. I want to create banks of resources. I want to support all the other coaches around me. I want to look at on and off the pitch work. I want to look at our digital outlook in terms of engaging players through calls and catch-ups. And now these are all the expectations that I have. The expectation is that we can try and join calls, that we can instill learning, that we want to learn, and that we're applying ourselves into every challenge method that arises within a session. So if we're there just to have a kickabout, and if you listen to my earlier podcast talking about the different player personalities and what kind of player that we have, then it's very important to understand the kinds of players and personalities in terms of what works for them and what doesn't. So if you've got players who don't like online calls or can't access them, or an online call isn't for them, then you're not going to engage them. But for those who are coming on an online call and have that expectation that they're going to be there to continue learning, then you want to maximise that time with them and you want to show them why it's been worth their moment of time coming online and having that call. They're able to learn so much more by just jumping on that call, and they're able to apply themselves in training so much more. They're able to take away so much, and you will continue to motivate them in terms of the way they go and learn. But when we talk about ourselves, we must be aware of how we must have this awareness of this consciousness that we talk about. We must be conscious and aware of the players as well as what we do as coaches and how we react in those moments. So a lot of coaches will become very emotional because that's the game of football. Now, we must be resilient as coaches, we must be mindful, and we must have a mentality that we're a role model at all times. So if we're highly emotional in a game, for example, then we must ask the questions, do I need to get so emotional? What standards and expectations am I setting for my players? How do I manage myself on a game day situation? And how do I manage the players if I'm emotional myself? If I'm also emotional, then the players are going to become emotional and they're not going to manage themselves or their expectations whilst I'm going through this myself. If I'm emotional, I'm not going to regulate or manage the game or manage the situation or environment, and the dynamic changes completely because I'm not aware of who I am in that context. So I've seen a lot of coaches lose their temper or become highly emotional during game days and matches, as well as training sessions when players don't react or respond to the way they're looking. Now, if we're aware of who we are as a coach, we must be aware how we can connect and engage with our players. What works for them? What strategies? But we must have a strategy for ourselves to remain calm and remain managing those game situations. We must have strategies that allow us to effectively coach and be that role model on the sidelines that can manage the players and the game. We must also be aware that players' emotions will rub off on us, and this could affect our own mindfulness and mentality during a session or away from the game of football. So even when we're at home and even when we're trying to switch off from football, or we're just sitting there watching the TV, there could be a moment of time when a player is flickered into your mind, or a moment from a training session during that week that you've just recalled and remembered. And there may be something that you want to address, or it may be something that you just want to leave in the past, but has it negatively impacted you because you weren't happy with the expectation within that session. But we must be aware and resilient to the fact that everyone's temperamental. There's only so often people will take everything on board, and there may be times when they snap, where they may not respond, where they may not adapt well to certain situations. And although we're creating sessions that are empowering, dynamic, that they're challenging, that they're stimulating, that they provide learning, that they give great outcomes in terms of our technical, our psychological, our physical, our tactical areas, there are also times when sessions aren't going to be the greatest. And we must be aware of this, and players may not enjoy sessions, they may not enjoy parts of it, and it's completely fine for them going away hating a session. For example, Monday evening I planned a session with a different group that I delivered on Saturday morning. The Saturday morning group took to the session really well, and they really enjoyed the dynamic and the outcomes of the session. They took on board the challenges, they pushed themselves, there was team bonding, there was teamwork, there was leadership, there was problem solving, there was resilience to some of the downfalls in terms of the results that were coming back, in terms of the individual challenges. But generally the group on Saturday really enjoyed the session. Now, I delivered it twice on Monday to two different groups, one being a younger group of primary school age and one being a secondary group. Now, sometimes there's a consideration that I have that a session may work with one group or another. So, for example, what might work with a primary group might not work with a secondary, and vice versa. However, I delivered the same session as I felt it was adaptable to both, and that there would be good response. However, the first group I had, the primary group on Monday, really took to the session, pushed themselves, but the dynamic and outcomes in terms of enjoyment wasn't what I had with the group on Saturday. So they took out the technical calls, the core technical information and challenges in terms of the primary group on the Monday evening, which was really good, but the enjoyment wasn't there. So generally the session didn't run the same. So then that session, a lot of the players left a bit lost in terms of their mindset. They felt as if that session wasn't really impactful. However, from my own coaching perspective, I knew it was impactful from what I was able to observe, from what I instilled, from what I planned in the session, from what the outcomes were, how the players were challenged and stimulated, how the players responded and continued to push themselves. So there's a lot of considerations for me, which I knew, although the players left happy, that there were a lot of positive outcomes from that session. Now, with the older group, it was an under 12s. They didn't respond to the session as well as the other two groups. They didn't enjoy it. They didn't want to challenge themselves. They didn't see the point in it. One player said, "Why can't we just play football?" Now, I've spoken about the importance of making a situation, a game, training, look like a situation that is apparent and that is open to a player in terms of their perspective and what a game looks like to them. So when a player talks about can we just play football, it's because they've never been challenged, they've never been stimulated, they've never been open to this way of learning or this way of coaching or these types of sessions. So automatically, they're already in a mindset of what football looks like to them. Now, I want to adapt my session to try and re-engage these players, or this player that has asked this question. And I want to provide a mentality of what football looks like to them, to then get them back into my way of thinking and opening up their mind that football is so much more than what they know. Now, they're being challenged by a coach who has a lot of experience, qualification, a lot of motivation, has worked with many different groups and different standards of players, and has opened up such a wide mentality and perspective from the experiences that I've had on my own coaching journey and how I've continued to learn from other coaches and players around me. I've also reflected on my sessions and time as a coach and how I've continued to adapt in the way I engage and work with players, how I set up coaching sessions, and so much more that surround this. So, what I want for these players is the fact that they've never been challenged in this situation or mindset, and that they've never been open to this type of coaching. So I must adapt to the group as they must adapt and get used to me over a period of time. Now, I must also open up their mindset, and this is what I'm aware of as a coach. I'm aware that these players have never been exposed to this type of coaching or this environment which I've put them in before. Now, this is why they're paying money to come to these types of coaching sessions at this coaching centre. So, this is the point of why I've come in, to try and impact them, to try and coach them, to try and give an alternative reality of what football is, to expose them to different types of training which they've never had before. And this is a great importance for them to take away so much on their journey to really push them in the boundaries that they've never had with the challenges and expectations which will allow them to have this holistic approach in terms of football. And this is again why we lose so many footballers. It's because they've never been put in these environments, they've never been challenged, they've never had their mindset changed or open in terms of another horizon of what football could look like and how they may be exposed to it. So automatically under 12s, if they're going, can we just play football, because they don't understand or they've not considered the outcomes carefully or they've not challenged themselves because the coach has told them to do this, then it's already showing that there's concerns with their motivations, with their game intelligence and understanding in terms of why they're there for a session, in terms of how hard they work. So because they're not working hard because the coach has told them to, they're not working hard because they don't understand the session, they're not working hard because football doesn't look like this, isn't what looks like for them. And now there's a lot of key considerations. Plan A, do I go down the route of changing sessions so that they're happy? Well, I can do, and I can adapt, and I try and get them back on board. Or B, do I keep pushing them and challenging them and showing them that they must work hard regardless, because this is what the coach has been put on. Now, they could go on a long coaching journey, and if they want to make it professional, managers can chop and change. First team coaches, academy coaches will chop and change. There'll be changes of groups. Now, they're going to be exposed to different environments, different types of training, and football that looks different to each and every coach because their philosophy is different. Now, a coach may follow a coaching curriculum, and this is what a club may instill. However, a coach will have their own coaching philosophy in terms of the way they want to coach and get the coaching curriculum outcomes and learning points instilled within their session in terms of their own philosophy. And because that's what football looks like to them. So these footballers must be aware that if they're going to go on a journey, they must work hard regardless. And that football is going to have a different environment. So when I talk about being our own selves and what we're like as coaches, we must be aware that football is different to us in terms of what it is to the young players. We must also be aware that players won't react to our sessions as well, that players won't enjoy each and every session, and it's completely fine to deliver sessions and players not to have enjoyed them as much in terms of every session. Now, if I deliver 10 sessions, I'm not expecting players to enjoy all 10. If they enjoy 7 or 8, then I've done a good job. If they've enjoyed 6, well, there's a lot of learning outcomes for them to keep improving to try and get to 7 or 8. If it's below 5, then I would start looking at the type of sessions that I'm delivering in terms of my personality and who I am as a coach. Am I a coach who just wants to discipline and shout at the group all the time? Or am I a coach who wants to have that fine balance between discipline and fun and providing those learning outcomes at all times? So it's understanding what kind of coach we want to be, but what kind of personality. If we have a personality that's disciplined and has high expectations all the time, then it's really important to try and get someone on board who can break the ice and bring that dynamic of fun and alter those training sessions, as well as create that holistic experience. Someone who can be fun can really help your change room and that environment, as well as impact the players and types of training that you deliver. They can also alter up in terms of the technical ability that's offered within sessions. Now, from previous experience, when I've worked with a lot of young players, I used to deliver a lot of obstacle courses. They were very fun, they engaged, they learned. But as I've got older and more experienced and continued coaching with, especially within an academy environment, and you have these high expectations, when you've worked in a certain type of way for so long and worked with certain types of coaches who are just looking at technical and tactical types of sessions, i.e. in terms of switching play, breaking lines, playing within the final third, use of wide play, and getting the ball back in to a central area to provide an overload within midfield, to then to play the ball backwards, and this kind of session which continues to expand so much tactically and technically because of the information that they put in. Then sometimes you forget that you can use obstacle courses and they're completely fine, especially with top tier academy groups, because they're fun and it provides a different type of learning. And sometimes that's what players need to get away from all this type of overloaded coaching which we can provide them with at times. So in terms of a coach that I work with and who is my assistant manager, he likes obstacle courses, he likes sessions with lots of fun, and even though they're not as timed as mine are, not as disciplined, doesn't provide as many learning outcomes, he still provides learning outcomes, fun and enjoyment. And he remembers that we're coaching young kids, and the point of kids is to have fun and to enjoy their football journey. Not every player, again relating to these football personalities, is going to want to be a professional footballer. Some are just there because they enjoy football, they enjoy being with their mates. Some are never going to make it because they don't have the technical ability. So in that case, if you get a group of players who will go on and play association football or semi-pro, or will go on to continue to play in seniors, there will also be a core group of players that will call it a time after their junior years. And it's about remembering, for those who don't make it and those who give up, that they really enjoyed their football journey, but they provided themselves with fun and enjoyment that they can look back on fondly and hopefully instill within their own children to enjoy their own football journey as well. It also gives those players perspective in terms of what they really took away as a child, and we can put too many expectations and pressure on a child just because they're playing football, and that relates to us as coaches and what coach do we want to be. Are we a coach that is level-headed, a coach that is fun, a coach that wants to instill a balance and variety of all these things? Or are we a coach who has constant high expectations, demands, puts on pressure, wants the very best for his team, but always strives to win? Is that the right environment to put on? You can have all of that, but you must remember that sessions are fun. You're coaching young kids. You can have kids who are never going to make it, but they're always going to enjoy these sessions and they're always going to want to come back because this is the only time they'll really, truly enjoy playing football. And this is a time that they get to engage with their coach and their teammates and really enjoy being part of something. There's a lot of takeaways within this podcast, and especially with all my episodes. Hopefully what I say will instigate your learning and instigate some thoughts for you to go off and think about other things. Or you may want to continue listening and explore in terms of what I have to say and the outcomes that I want for each in different platforms and avenues. So there's lots of different ways you can take information and listen to me, and there's many different things that you can take away and apply in certain areas. These are just considerations and reflections that I've had as a coach and what I'd like to instill within my own coaching journey as I continue to move forward and reflect. Now, how I was as a coach 5 years ago doesn't necessarily mean I'm the same coach that I am now. I have a coaching perspective and philosophy that is more broadened, that has more horizons, a bigger outlook, that I'm more adaptable, and I have different expectations than I had 5 years ago. Now, my non-negotiable expectations in terms of turning up late, turning up early, being focused, being dedicated while you're in a session, having hard work, being motivated, wanting to be on the pitch because you're there out of your own choice, not because you've been forced to come, being disciplined and listening to me, being focused, knowing that you must learn in every session, because otherwise why you come in, what's the point of your parents paying money? Then these are considerations, because your parents are giving up their time, or family members and so on, and that you're giving up time that will never be that can never be given back. So if you're going to be there and your parents are paying for you to be there, regardless of what kind of personality you have, I want you to learn regardless of anything. You will then have those own opportunities and those learning outcomes for you to reflect on as a player now, and allow you to actually go away within life and football knowing that you were given all the opportunities and learning outcomes. Regardless of any personality and trait of a player, they must learn, especially if a parent is paying. Even if a player doesn't want to be there, engage them to learn. This may pique interest at a later age, or allow them to go off in a different avenue from playing, such as being a referee or coach, which is a really good horizon. Now, when I was a young player, there weren't as many learning outcomes instilled. I only trained for 1 hour a week, and I had a game on a Sunday where I had limited minutes. But I enjoyed all the moments I had with my team. I just wish I was pushed more, I was challenged. I wish I could learn more. I wish I asked coaches more questions. But I wish coaches created more of an environment that allowed me to ask questions, and created more of an environment that instilled learning. If I had instilled learning but I lacked the technical ability, then I'm sure I could have developed quicker as a coach, or had more opportunities presented to me as a player in terms of working in different technical groups. Now that also comes down to the coach personality that I had, and how they had to manage the players, and what groups could have been managed, and how training could have taken place. So there's much expectations and considerations that we have. And I look at the reflections of what coaches tried to do for me and what they didn't do for me, and how I can instill this in terms of my own coaching philosophy to impact all my players, especially in a way that I wasn't impacted in terms of what I wanted to get out as a young child. I look back with a lot of fond memories when I was a young player, and I really miss these years, but I try to instill all the enjoyment and fun to keep my group together. The group that I have now and I manage have been together longer than I was as a player in terms of my group.